Making custom door pods is not easy and it's not cheap, but I've got a solution for you. Recently on our live stream, we talked to JT from High Voltage Car Audio, and I chatted after the show a little bit, and he said it took him 3 weeks to build the door panels in his Tahoe. There are some shortcuts you can take that can save a little bit of that labor. Parker the Basshead built some no fiberglass door pods. I messaged him to see how long that took, and he said that still took him 2 weeks to finish. Now you could pay a shop to build your door pods, but those are going to be pricey because, well, you got to pay for that labor. Now the labor is the worst part, but the materials aren't free, and you've got to have a lot of stuff. You've got to have resin and fiberglass and fleece and Bondo and sandpaper and tons of sandpaper. As far as tools go, you can probably pull it off with just a jigsaw, but the reality is you're probably going to need a router or a CNC machine. But I was able to install these in an afternoon using mostly just hand tools. I did it using some of these pre-molded pods from CustomSpeakerPods.com. Brandon over at CustomSpeakerPods.com sent these out. Hey, thank you, Brandon. I appreciate you sending something out. He's got over 400 in stock for over 40 cars. He uses 3D imaging technology and CNC cutters and all kind of fancy tools to make these shapes that are designed to fit the various contours of your door panel. And the best part is you can just bolt them on in an afternoon. You will need to pull your door panel off of the car. It'll be a lot easier to work on outside of the vehicle. You will have to drill into your existing door panel, and in all likelihood, you will be cutting it in order to have clearance for the magnet. So if you're not like fully committed to the idea of a door pod, maybe you don't want to do this. I actually ran to a local junkyard and picked up a pair of door panels. Let's pop on out to the garage and get some of these installed. When we're done, we'll talk about the pros and the cons of these speaker pods. It's always a good idea to go ahead and lay everything out. Some of the tools you're going to need, you'll need a drill so you can start your initial hole. You're going to want to grab some Sharpies or something else to draw or mark with. I'm going to grab some blue painter's tape, and I'm going to put some tape down with the hopes that that will leave a little cleaner cut line, and at the very least, it'll be easier to see what I'm doing on video. Make sure you've got something you can cut with. I ran out to Home Depot and picked up one of these Ryobi Roto Zips because I already have Ryobi tools. Pretty much every tool company that has a battery sells their version of this. You don't have to use a RotoZip style tool. You can use a Dremel. In fact, Dremel has a RotoZip style attachment for just like 20 bucks. So if you've already got a Dremel, that might be the option you want to go. Depending on the shape and the contours of your door panel, you might be able to get away with using a jigsaw to cut these out. You might be able to get a multi-tool to work, but this RotoZip just did a fantastic job. Hang on, we need to rewind a little bit. There's something we should do before we start making our cut. We need to take our panel and we need to flip it over and see what's going on back here and look for any obstacles. This jute right here is going to gum up your blade, might cause a problem. Go ahead and pull that back. You can put it back with some CA glue or something like that later. And also you want to notice where your hangers are. On this junkyard panel, this hanger here is broken, but this hanger I'm actually going to lose when I cut out the holes for the speakers. So that's another good reason to go to the junkyard to get your panels. Even if you are fully committed and don't mind cutting into yours, you might screw something up and you're definitely going to lose some integrity of your panel when you start doing this. That's true for any door pod build. You destroy the panel in the process. That's just how it goes. And having a junkyard panel gives you confidence so you're not worried about screwing it up. Brandon at CustomSpeakerPods.com said that he likes to just order them off eBay when he needs them. I'm going to be installing a pair of these PA drivers here that Celestion sent me. Thank you so much, Celestion, for sending these out. I'm really excited to see how these big, beefy, high-efficiency PA drivers sound in a car. And that's going to work great with the double door pod because these are 8 ohm drivers and I can mount these things and wire them in parallel, and I can get a 4 ohm load at the amplifier. That combined with the efficiency of this driver, it ought to be pretty loud. Now, as you can see, the driver is deeper than the pod, so in my case, I'm definitely going to have to cut my doors. That's going to be true for most cars, but maybe not every car. These universal ones, for example, they fit these big BP Celestions just fine. Not a lot of clearance back there, so you might want to cut a hole in the panel for venting, but they will at least fit in the pod without any trouble. Just for comparison, here's some old coaxials. I probably had these 6, 7, 8 years. And you can see that those smaller coaxials don't have enough clearance either. And I want to take a second to look at the size of these drivers. This driver from Celestion calls it a 6-inch driver. It fits these pods perfect. I couldn't have asked for a better fit just right out of the box. Now this coaxial is marketed as a 6.5, and as you can see, it is really undersized for a 6.5. In fact, there's no way to actually mount it on the pod itself unless you made a mounting flange just to put this thing on the pod, which kind of defeats the purpose of a bolt-on pod. We're trying to avoid doing any fabrication. And I'm showing this so that you know if you decide to order some of these pods, you need to look really close at the specs for your speaker. The opening for the 6.5-inch pod seems to be about 5 9/16. The overall outside for the universal pod looks to be about 7 inches. And the custom pods for my truck appear to be about the same. One day speaker companies will start making standardized universal sizes, and then our lives will be a whole lot easier. But between now and then, you need to take a few extra minutes to look at the specs to make sure your driver is actually going to fit your pods. I underestimated how fat the magnets were on the back of these Celestions, and so I had to go back with my Dremel and the drum sander and open these back up. Now we're at the part that is the easiest to screw up. This is the one spot that you will make a mistake if you're going to make a mistake. You're going to take the pod and fit it against the door so that it matches all the contours of the door. And you want to press it down a little bit and probably secure it in place, maybe with some tape. Maybe have a friend hold it in place for you. Then grab something to mark the holes. You can use a Sharpie, you can use a punch. Whatever you want to use is fine. The main thing is that after you start marking those holes, you don't want the pod to shift any, because if the pod shifts, your holes are going to be in the wrong place, the screws aren't going to line up, and you're going to have some big, ugly, nasty gaps. Once the screw holes are marked, you just drill out the screw holes, and then you can attach the pod with the included hardware. Now here's something super important. You don't want to over tighten the hardware. They're going to throw in some screws and some nylock nuts, and if you over tighten the hardware, you run the risk of cracking your door or cracking the pod. So put away your impact driver. You don't need a bunch of ugga-duggas to do this. When I started installing my screws, I discovered that one of my screws was behind one of the factory hangers, and there was really no way that I could get a wrench on it. So I put a cutting wheel on my Dremel and took that hanger off. Depending on how fast you are with your hand tools, it'll take a few minutes to screw everything down. As you can see, this thing meshes up really well with the contours on the door, except for this one part right here where I got my screw alignment a little bit messed up. So I'm going to take it off and put some gasket material in there and see if I can clean that up a little bit. Now that I've got these mounted on the door, let me tell you my thoughts about them, pros and cons. So these pods retail for about $155, and at first glance you're thinking $155 for a pair of pods seems a little bit high. But what you got to remember that if you were to go and buy all the materials you needed to make a similar size pod, you're going to spend 60 to 80 bucks depending on what kind of material you buy. And you can spend even more. For example, if you just buy the basic Bondo, it might be 10 to 20 bucks for a quart, but if you upgrade to something like a Rage Gold that's easier to sand, you might be spending 50 bucks a quart. And of course you'll need tools like spreaders and chip brushes and those kind of things. And if you don't have any scrap materials laying around, you might end up buying a full sheet of plywood or MDF in order to make your pods. I was very fortunate that the black plastic right out of the box matched my interior very well. It might not match yours, but you can paint these pods. So that's an added expense on top of this pod. But if you're making custom door pods, well, you're going to be painting those or covering them in vinyl or something like that. So you've still got some added expense with a custom made pod. Now, is this as strong as a custom made pod? Probably not. The weak point is always going to be the door. The plastic on these pods is no more and no less flimsy than the material that your door panel is made out of. Another concern you might have is the seal between the pod and the door panel. Is that seal airtight? Well, if you're worried about that, you could probably put some gasket material on it. The thing to remember is that your door probably has a bunch of holes in it already. So it's probably not that important. So there's always a limit to how much you can actually seal off, and that's true with these pods or with custom door pods. Another big advantage is just the sheer number of pods that they have. Like I said earlier, they had something like 400 different styles for over 40 different vehicles, and they've also got the universal pods that might fit your car if you don't have a custom pod for your car. Another downside of these pods is the fit and finish. You are going to have some exposed screw heads and exposed seam on the pod, but that's the trade-off for a simple bolt-on pod. That's an important thing to remember. No matter what you're doing in life, there are trade-offs, and that's the trade-off you get for the massive amount of labor that you save by using these pods. The key advantage is the simple fact that you can get this done in an afternoon. At some point in the future, I'll do a video where I install one panel in the truck and I'll drag out a measurement microphone and see if I can get a comparison between these two Celestion drivers and the drivers I already have in my truck. Click on this video right here to see what I'm currently running in my doors, and hit the subscribe button down here so you don't miss it when I install these in the truck. These are my $10 patrons right here, and I want to give a special shout out to my $25 patrons, Ben and Dylan. I'm Justin, the DIY audio guy, and I will see you on the next adventure.